Okay, the last questions that I want to deal with focus on how do you approach safety issues. You know, this is a question that comes up all the time because, you know, for when children are very young, we are basically in charge of their safety. And the way in which you teach most children what's safe is through your behavior, through motoring them through safe behaviors, through helping them define what situations are safe and what are dangerous, and little by growing their common judgment through trial and error, and they eventually develop their own repertoire of what they consider safe and unsafe based upon experience. So how do you approach these issues for a child who may not have joint intention, who may not engage in social emotional reciprocity and social reference early on? And what do you do for a child who's fearless, impulsive, and cannot necessarily draw the link between if you put your hand on a stove one time and get burned, if you try to do it 2 weeks later, you're going to get the same result. What do you do for an individual to help them learn safely when they don't correct on the basis of their own experience? And that's what makes safety such a primary issue for individuals along the spectrum. Okay, so there are a couple ways that we go about that. Number one, you know, you need to, like with every child, never allow a child into a situation that you deem to be unsafe. You know, you need to call out what is safe is unsafe. You know, for situations where there's not going to be a significant repercussion, you need to allow a child with autism to learn through natural consequences. So if a child is building a tower of blocks that are not too heavy and they're a little too close of it and you see they're bumping it, you don't interfere so that they don't see that if you bump the tower, it's going to fall down on you. But that's very different than letting a child run out in the face of traffic. It's very different than letting a child who indiscriminately approaches strangers anywhere, you know, to not allow them to do that and not wanting to frighten them, but to begin to teach them, you know, what is appropriate in approaching unfamiliar people and what isn't, and who's a stranger and who isn't a stranger. So, you know, someone raised the issue specifically of running into the street. How do you teach a child who has no fear and no understanding of what's involved, you know, not to run in the street? Okay, the first step would be to not only hold that child's hand as you're crossing the street, but if you have a verbal child, to create a verbal ongoing commentary of all the steps that you follow in the course of crossing a street. Okay, then you would need to render that, you know, in a concrete form. So if you have a young child who has language but is unable to read, what you would do is you would create a visual format of the sequential steps one would have to follow in crossing the street. One would be holding an adult's hand, one would be looking to see if the light had turned green, another would be looking to see if the cars have stopped after the light has turned green, another step would be, you know, walking in the crosswalk, another, you know, you can see how you would sequence this process. And what you would do with the child is you would have them follow either a pictorial, or for older children who can read, you can do this through having them read and formulate a checklist for themselves. And then after they cross the street effectively, then you would have them evaluate whether they followed all those steps and whether that resulted in something safe. Now, for those children who are more impulsive and lack language, obviously you have to train them from a behavioral perspective over and over, and how you would go about that is by using reinforcers. So if you had a nonverbal child with autism that you were trying to teach to be safer, not because you're going to allow them to independently cross the street, but they will be more compliant and accept you're holding their hand as they get older and learn how to cross the street, then what you would do is you would use immediate reinforcers, probably food. You know, you would find a child's preferential food, and each time they fought, you know, once again, you would do it pictorially so that they could visually see each step. You would break it up into small segments that you would chain and link to one another, and each time they completed one step of that crossing procedure, you would give them the reinforcer. If they did not do it properly, you would not give them their reinforcer. So ultimately, for a child who was not able eventually to learn how to cross the street safely on his or her own, you would teach them a routine that they would follow that would keep them safe, that would allow them to stop each step along the way to ensure their safety, and you would elicit their cooperation and involvement in the process because they would see that appropriate behavior would result in an immediate tangible reward that would benefit from them. Okay, and so even though I'm talking about crossing the street, I'm just trying to intimate what is the kind of methodology we use to teach children skills. We break them up into sequential pieces in small bites, and then we link, once one segment of the skill is learned, we then link it to the next step that would follow in the sequential acquisition of the skills, and then we link step 1 and 2 together. And so you could see even the most complex activity can be broken down into its constituent parts, and as long as you teach an individual with an appropriate methodology one step at a time, you can teach someone skills that they don't necessarily acquire intuitively. You know, another question came up, what do you do with a child who keeps unbuckling his or her seatbelt? You know, that is a scary, scary thing for parents and grandparents. Not only is it against the law in the state of California, but we all know what happens if you get hit by a car and you are not in some form of restraint. Okay, so number one, you want to begin to determine when is it that the child unbuttons the seat belt. You know, does it occur every time he or she is in a car? Does it occur at the initial part of the journey? Does it occur once, you know, the car is in motion? You know, does it occur when you go one place as opposed to another? Does it depend on whether the child's well rested or not? You need to determine whether or not, if you bring some of the child's preferential toys, you know, into the car and you've buttoned their seatbelt and you can direct them to do something that is pleasurable and they enjoy, does that keep them away from buttoning the seatbelt? And then you also want to determine what the intent is or the function of that behavior. Is the seatbelt too tight? Is the child wanting to play so he or she can reach objects that he or she can't reach if their seatbelt is on? So once again, you want to determine the intent of the behavior and the function of the behavior, because that helps guide the solution that you're ultimately going to come up with. You know, another thing that needs to be done is for young children that you can't really speak this process through, you know, not only do you need a visual schedule of what needs to be done, so you would create a schedule of what is entailed in getting in the car, having their seatbelt done, have a picture of their pleasurable toys that they would utilize, and then have a picture of where they're going. And so you would train a child to wear a seatbelt initially by taking them on a short journey where you know they really wanted to be. And then, for instance, imagine the message you would convey to a child if you had laid this out on a pictorial basis or verbally, or allowed a child to read the sequence of what it takes to go from one point to another place that they find highly desirable. Imagine the second that child took their seatbelt off, if you turned around and went home and they couldn't get to where they wanted to be. Now, once again, you don't try to teach a child this when you are planning to take a family vacation and turning around isn't an option. Nobody can change a behavior unless you have a control over the environment, right? Without environmental control, you can't use behavioral intervention principles effectively. But kids learn from natural consequences. Telling a child 101 times not to unbuckle their seatbelt is not going to get their job done. You need to demonstrate from their perspective and from their meaning structure why unbuckling their seatbelt doesn't work for them. Okay? Now, everybody, you know, does not have the luxury of always, you know, taking a short trip or planning in advance to train a child to stay buckled, because sometimes out of nowhere a child suddenly buckles his or her seatbelt and they've never ever done it before. So how do you approach an issue of that nature? One of the things that you do is you stop the car. You know, you let the child know that you cannot drive the car unless that seatbelt is in operation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you're taking a child to a preferential, you know, destination, it's a lot easier to make that message known. But if a child sees that the car cannot move without the seatbelt done, and you find ways to redirect or distract the child into a preferential activity, the odds are that you're going to be able to get that seatbelt done, keep the child involved and engaged. You know, and whenever you're in a car and you're held captive, it's always good to have some reinforcers available. Whether that is, a preferential food, whether that is a toy that you don't allow the child to access while you're doing a typical ride and you pull out of the glove compartment in case trouble arises, always having something special that you can utilize as a reward for a child is vital. You can also, if you have more than one child in the car, you can reinforce the child who has the seatbelt on and let the child see who's not buckled up that he or she can't be rewarded until that seatbelt's done. And then as soon as he or she, buckles up, the reward needs to be forthcoming. Because the basic issue in behavioral intervention is the immediacy of the reward, so the child can draw a causal link between a behavior and the reward or natural consequence that he or she is receiving, and that way you don't have to deal with some of the problems of transfer and generalization that I was speaking to earlier. So that certainly is not an extensive, discussion of behavioral management, but what I'm really hoping is that you can see how these basic principles could be applied to a whole range of situations in a sequential manner that, generates natural, immediate consequences so that the child understands the difference between a good and bad choice and what outcome emerges as the result of his or her own personal choice.